Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the community of practice of digital peace building. We're just going to give a minute or two for a few more people to join. And as we are waiting, it'd be lovely for you to just introduce yourself in the chat, your name, and if you're with an organization or anything else about what's bringing you to this community of practice.
Cool, I'll go first. My name is John Cavanaugh, and I am the executive director of the Plunk Foundation. I just joined AFP, so I'm very excited. This is my first event.
Great, John. All right, so we're going to ask others to go ahead and use the chat for the introductions. So happy that you're joining us, John. Welcome.
Thank you.
That's great. Okay, just go ahead and use the chat. Say hello. Yes, Sri Lanka. I think we've probably got a Kenyan and East African there. I see some colleagues from Search. Wonderful, Patrick. Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get this rolling. My name is Lena Slackmulder. I'm with Search for Common Ground, and I'm one of the co-hosts of this digital peace building community of practice that is a collaboration between the Alliance for Peace Building, Search for Common Ground, Mercy Corps, and the Toda Peace Institute. And we are an open community of practice where we explore different ways of understanding and responding to digital harms and using digital tools to augment our peace building work. And these sessions are recorded. They're later available on the website. And if you have other friends and colleagues that you'd like to invite, please just write to Nick and he can add them to the mailing list, where there's all kinds of other little information that gets shared out as well. So today I'm very pleased to be introducing our guest for today's session. His name is John Zoltner, and he's the Senior Advisor at Save the Children for Technology and Development, and also the Global Lead for Protection of Children from Digital Harm. And we've invited John to speak to us today because there's a lot of intersections between digital peace building and how the Save the Children and the child protection community at large has been working to protect children. Just before I turn it over to you, John, I want to say that during this session, we'll have a bit of a Q&A. There will then be time for questions that you can, speak verbally. We can use the chat, but over the next 20 minutes or so, we'll be having a conversation with John and I. And so we look forward to your questions later on. So go ahead and say more about your background, John.
Sure. Well, thanks a lot, Lena, for the introduction and also for this opportunity to talk to the group. So I've always worked in the intersection of technology and social good. So from the beginning of my career, just doing multimedia storytelling, I worked a lot in the community networking or the access to technology or telecenter movement. I worked with building the capacity of nonprofits to use technology. I've never worked directly in the peace building community, but I've been associated with organizations too. But as you say, Lena, I think there's there's sort of a false distinction between a lot of these areas because there's so much overlap. So, the work I do is relevant to peace building and vice versa. So I came to Save the Children in 2018, and I came to start up the ICT for D practice. But as we grew that practice, I started to get more and more interested in use of technology to protect children. I realized that for my whole career, I had been sort of pushing people in the programs that we operate towards using technology and towards using the internet. And for a lot of good reasons, I think, so that people could have access to information and to educational resources or economic opportunities, job opportunities. But also I started to realize that these spaces could be pretty dangerous at times, and you know, spaces for harassment and for violence. So I started to focus in that area, and today I really, it's most of my work. So it's something that's given me kind of a new passion and has taken over most of my professional focus.
So, you know, Save the Children is you know, it's 100 years old, and as you said, it's been doing so many different kinds of initiatives to protect children, to expand opportunities for them to achieve their potential. So do you want to say a little bit more about what actually triggered you and the team at Save the Children to start really narrowing your focus on trying to address some of these digital harms?
Sure. Yeah. So as you said, we're 100+ years old, and we've always been a child protection organization. So our founder was one of the people who started to advocate for children and that children should have rights of their own. And so we focus on education. We focus on ensuring that children are healthy until they're 5 years old, at which they're much more likely to thrive. And but in child protection, you know, when we were started, there were all the same problems that exist today: wars, disease, forced labor of children, but digital technologies didn't exist. And it's an area where my colleagues, before I was at SAVE, started to realize that the children we were working with have access to these technologies. And at first, just a few did, but very quickly, as you know, access to cell phones and the internet, and especially mobile internet today, really grew in the global South and among the children that we work with and support for the most part. And these are issues I think that the peacebuilding community always faces. I think they're common issues. But as the context and the environment children were in started to change, we've always had to update our activities and kind of the frameworks we use and the way we approach our work. But digital technologies was really different for us. So it's an area where we had to start studying exactly what happens, what are the risks that children face, and we took on some of the problems that we saw were most common. So cyberbullying, harassment, especially of girls and women on the internet, online sexual exploitation and abuse, and then of course recruitment for for human trafficking, for violent extremism. And I know many people on this call probably work in that area especially. So it's an area of our work that has gradually grown, and today we have a lot of people throughout. We've been working over the past several years to integrate the digital protection within our child protection and in general work.
And I think that's one of the questions we have is whether or not, you found as a very large child protection based organization that you needed to have like a separate group of tech experts to do this, or did you actually find that you needed to work with the child protection experts? And was this an exclusively online initiative that was missing and needed to be built, or was it something more integrated?
Right. We do have a separate technology for development team and of course an IT team. And tech for development is really focused on technology for projects. So use of technology to support projects, make them more efficient, more scalable, more effective. But in this area, obviously there are technology components, and it's important to understand to a degree how technology works, and we need those experts working in this area. But for me, what I try to always drill through our child protection staff is they're the experts. There's technology, of course, that needs to be addressed in the work, but I think that the child protection principles are what should lead the work. And one quick example is when I started this work, I was setting up a program for youth digital hangouts. And one of the things I was doing is where we were together in a room, I had children using, or my plan was for children to use headphones. And right away, the child protection staff came to me, and the headphones was a great technical recommendation. So audio would be clearer, but it was a risk that we have very strong safeguarding rules, and we need to be able to hear what the volunteers and other people were saying.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So let's go right straight to an example of how you feel that you were able to use digital tools to try to address some of those digital harms for children, John.
Yeah, I was thinking about this over the past week or so, and I think a great example is work that we did with Omdena. Omdena is a small company that started out of India, and its focus now is on use of artificial intelligence, AI, to support any and kind of the greatest challenges, humanitarian or development challenges of our age. So they team up with a lot of organizations in order to understand the needs and look for ways that AI could support the work that they're doing. Either, a lot of it is data related, data analysis in order to support decision making. And in 2020, we teamed up with Omdena, and we had what was really kind of an open-ended challenge where we were at first just sort of looking at ways we could use AI and in order to, if we looked for openly available data that we could download or access through the internet or get through partner organizations. And we also scraped data. We went through and this team of about 60 people who were data scientists from all over the world looked for sources that we could grab information from or data from. And these were people of all kind of levels of experience, and from a few undergrad students, mostly grad students, and up to professionals who have decades of experience in data analysis. And so we grabbed as much data as we could, and we had a few teams that self-organized into teams that looked at what we might be able to do that could shed light on what happens to children or what the the risks that children face on the internet or through using digital technologies in general, not even only on the internet. And we ended up with about 5 groups who were looking at different ways of analyzing data. One, for instance, worked on scraping information from publications that were mostly academic publications that talked about analysis of risks that children face and recommendations for how we could handle those risks. But the one that really I thought had the most impact or had the potential to have the most impact was what we call a classifier that used natural language programming, which is one area of AI, and other data analysis techniques to identify online grooming. So the idea was to look at online text-based chats. We couldn't really, or still can't really analyze imaging, although that's becoming more and more possible. So they worked in order to identify and come up with a lexicon that would allow us to basically compute whether these chats match this large database that we were able to build of chats that had been identified by law enforcement as online grooming or enticement of youth to share images of themselves, for instance, or to engage in some kind of, for the most part, sexual interaction or content. And the way it worked was it wasn't just an application to search for keywords. There are, as you know, a lot of applications that screen words that can be used that are somehow we determine are related to some kind of risk or but what it did is with each line of a text-based chat, it would compute its how close it was to the overall information in that database, so that as the chat progresses, it's constantly doing these computations until it reaches a threshold. So it reaches a threshold by, the closeness of those the phrases or the lines of the chat to this vast database of known grooming chats.
So I think we can see a little bit of an example of what that looks like. So yeah, so let's take a look at a short video that kind of outlines what that is. And you might want to add something after that. Go ahead.
The chatbot development for this task required a data set. So we built one from the ground up into a database. 1,227 screen names assigned. The corpus grew to more than 803,000 messages. We mapped 1,172 dialogues with nearly 5,000 lines of conversations. Each conversation was labeled risky or not. Additionally, each speaker and conversation had their own unique ID number assigned to them. Overall, the data held flags such as perp versus victim, male or female, or the level of line risk for future sentiment analysis. The team developed 3 different test environments of Python to build a chatbot. More than 2,500 lines of code was written with 657 lines in the chatbot alone. More than 3 weeks focused on upgrading or trying out new codes. The main goal was to be self-contained and be offline to avoid technical dependencies. Here the chatbot attempts to respond to my input. Depending on the batch run, I would have more results. The chatbot's output would be paired with a small program to determine if the conversation was risky or not. For example, Here, Alpha Kid is having a conversation with someone new. That person is asking to meet up with her and get her address. Watch how the warnings of the chat are added into the conversation.
So that's really interesting. Tell us a little bit more, John, about like, has that been deployed yet? Where is that at? What else have you learned from that process? I mean, what I understand was we use AI, we understand what kinds of dangerous chats can be indicative of online grooming or enticement. And then we're trying to automate a voice inside those chats to say, hey, watch out, this is dangerous. Is that accurate? You're muted.
Thanks. Yeah, so I mentioned that calculating the risk up to a threshold point. So once we hit that threshold, we can really take any action or recommend, depending on where the chat is or what the platform is, it can trigger an action. So that action might be calling a moderator if there are moderators on the platform and something like UBO, or it could be cutting off the chat entirely, could be going, in this example, this is set up to chat, send messages to who we've identified as a child, that who we were suspecting is the groomer can't see. But it could really be any action that we think will protect the child. So in the example, as the text isn't really right. It's not the how we would talk to a child, because it was just done in that chat by the Omdana team. But it's tested. We have the prototype. It was initially, the concept was created during that sprint with Omdana, but then we worked with a few volunteers who were part of that group, and we brought in a couple of other people in order to refine it over time. So now we're just about to start a second phase with Omdana, where we'll turn that into a prototype that we can actually run on platforms. So we'll put into production, and we'll be able to test in a real live environment.
You know, it's I'm sure many of us in the audience today are saying, oh, that would be great for bullying and hate speech and misinformation and all the kinds of things that we often talk about in this community. And, you know, I'm sure there'll be other questions around that, but does this require buy-in from some of these online platforms? And is it something that they see as also in their interests to work with SAVE on something like this with a digital harm mitigation focus?
Well, we've had a lot of interest. It's not something that the largest platforms would use, I think, because they're well equipped with their own systems, and it would probably be difficult for them to integrate what we're doing, integrate the technology at least with their systems. Although we're learning a lot, and we're doing research also in to understand what children identify as potential online violence, because we know, for instance, that there are a lot of examples that we would consider online violence, or we would consider grooming and any kind of negative interaction with children that they don't necessarily consider to be violence. They in fact, in many cases, they just think that's how the internet works, and those are the experiences they've had, unless it reaches a certain level of graveness. So from what we're learning, we can give a lot of lessons and recommendations, especially as this as the algorithm develops and is becomes stronger, and we identify, for instance, more phrases and more words that are being used by this community, if you want to call it, of groomers or people who are trying to reach children. So I see the largest platforms as using that information, but not necessarily using the technology, but really small and medium-sized organizations that have some kind of chat ability. Those are the ones that would actually use the technology.
And maybe just one further follow-up question, then let's go, let's move on. You know, we sometimes think about children as using particular platforms more than others, gaming platforms, Discord, Roblox, etc. Is that what you're referring to when you talk about the chats that are happening in those kinds of platforms?
Yeah, online gaming, social media, and any platform that's allowing children to talk to each other or people to talk to each other. Many platforms have a minimum age level, and we know they police those age levels as much as they can. A lot of times they'll go through and scrub a lot of accounts if they determine that those users are under, for instance, 13. But of course, a lot of children sneak through those filters. And also for Save the Children, we define a child as anyone up to the age of 18. So if a platform's minimum age is 13, they're still working with 13 to 17-year-olds. So those are the chats that or the chats that we're trying to provide information about. Those are the ones we're tracking and analyzing, and so those are the providers of chat that we would target.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me ask you one last question, John, and then to our participants today, you can already start to put questions in the chat or raise your hand. You know, one of the things that as peace builders we are grappling with is how effectively to do advocacy around having healthier digital spaces. We look at hate speech, bullying, and ongoing polarization, fake news, conspiracies as things that can drive division and actually lead people to justifying choosing violence to address their grievances. And, you know, when we look at this question of, you know, whether it's preventing child pornography to be online or preventing children from being abused or trafficked, it seems from afar that maybe you've had some more success in addressing some of the barriers, be it within the platforms or around regulation. And I just wonder, what is your perspective on that, and anything you can share that might be insightful for us as peace builders?
Sure, yeah, and you know, in the main body of work that I do is focused on online child sexual exploitation and abuse, and it's an area that's growing uncontrollably. From 2005 to 2020, there was a 15,000% rate increase of child sexual abuse materials, or what many people call child pornography, identified by NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, that tech companies based in the US are required to report to. So 15,000% in those 15 years. But the really shocking data point is it's really steeply increased from then. During COVID, we know, for instance, the first year of COVID, some of the mechanisms that receive reports about online child violence noted 100% rise, or 90 something percent. so it's an area, and that it's true, I think, of any type of technology that's bringing people together and facilitating communication. So I know throughout the peace building or human rights community, you're facing the same things. In our case, working with children, there are probably parts of that work that may be more difficult, because children always are kind of the ones that a lot of these negative dynamics hurt the most. But at the same time, there are laws in most countries that govern what can be done with children. And for instance, with NCMEC, companies are required to report those child sexual abuse materials. They work for the most part to try to stop hate speech online, which is something I know you've addressed, or to try to scrub or prevent violent material from being uploaded. But there's not necessarily a law about that content. So that in one way allows us a little more freedom, or gives us more support from those platforms. But I think really any of these, and if you use technology in any way to bring together or facilitate communication between a large number of people, you're going to have people that misuse those technologies. So, and even in international development, not with Save the Children, but I have a colleague or someone I've worked with in the past who told me a story about they created a community for community health workers who go in, and they're usually paraprofessionals or volunteers who are trained to do that work, and they'll go around in rural villages in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, and provide at least a minimum level of health services. So they created this, text-based community to support those community health workers so they could talk to each other. And right away, this was during COVID, they had one of the people they had trained, who was a community health worker, posting stuff that sounded pretty crazy about how COVID, this was in Nigeria, COVID was designed to sterilize Nigerian men, and just all this misinformation that this person apparently believed. He wasn't meaning to, there was no violent intent. And this is a platform, a community that was probably a couple of hundred people. So I think it's impossible, if you're providing a communication tool to a large number of people, to prevent misinformation, and also to prevent information or communication with violent intent. So my perspective is, those of us who are issue experts, and in our case around children's healthy development, we have to work with these platforms, because we know it's, they're here to stay. You're never, even if large platforms disappeared, people are still going to use technology to support these conversations, and for a lot of good reasons. But you need to be able to have the experts, or the people who are really caring for groups that are more vulnerable involved, to try to do things to identify and stop or change in some way what's happening online.
Thank you, John. And if we had more time, there's a lot of initiatives that Save the Children is doing to raise awareness and educate young people about some of these digital harms, very similar to a lot of the digital literacy work that many peace-building organizations are doing, very similar to some of the work about detecting fake news, mis and disinformation that some of us are doing, and you're tailoring that to the particular age group that you're working with, as well as teachers and parents. So, but I want to pause and see if there's, any contributions or other questions that we have from the group today. If you want to raise your hand, you can go ahead. There's a couple, comments in the chat, which we could also take a look at. But I just want to see if there's any hands or questions from our guest, our people here online, what you've noticed about what John is sharing.
Oh, and thanks, Ted, for posting that article. One issue Save the Children has had is last year there was a QAnon group took on Save the Children, hashtag Save the Children, and started using that to communicate, which caused a lot of confusion.
Good. Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, I will continue to go ahead with more questions that I have here. Okay, well, let me follow up with a further question then, John. So we were just talking about, you're not necessarily going to stop this, but I just want to push a little bit further of where do you feel as though, despite the rise of dangerous content online for children, that there has been the greatest success in trying to contain that? We've talked previously about the trust and safety departments. I know many of us who have engaged with different tech platforms know about the human rights or the integrity departments within these tech platforms. I'm interested to know, what is it that you've come to understand as some of the motivations around this? The barrier that we often face in trying to address things like extreme toxic polarization or hate speech online is that that's also what drives engagement, and that there's a financial disincentive for some tech companies to do something about this. This is just one perspective on this issue. Is that similar or different in the kind of advocacy and engagement that you've worked on with tech platforms?
Well, I think it's similar, and the issue is that if you allow communication, as I was saying, there's no way to prevent use by bad actors of that can target vulnerable groups that we all work with, and in my case, target children. So, and they are for-profit companies, so they establish these methods of communication because they're using that in order to provide a service to people, and they're earning profit in some way usually through ads, and so they want to support engagement. I would say the greatest success in this area is the use of hashing technology, specifically technology called photo-DNA that was developed more than a decade ago by Microsoft, and that gets licensed for free to organizations that are legally allowed to screen for this content. Because it's illegal in most cases. You can't just be a nonprofit that tries to do this work. You need to be licensed in order to be able to access these illegal materials. And hashing technology basically creates it analyzes an image and kind of maps the pixels in that image in order to create a unique finger that we call it a digital fingerprint. So it's basically a value that you calculate based on the image, which could be a still image or a video. And it's grown really accurate over time, so that even if a user makes changes to that image, at first they would crop the image or tint it in some way, or make some kind of change so that the technology wouldn't pick it up. But now in most cases it is caught. And groups like Internet Watch Foundation and NCMAC, ICMAC, Thorn, another US-based nonprofit, keep databases of these hash images, and they allow those organizations that are reviewing content and determining whether the content is illegal, and advising these platforms that they have this illegal content in the platforms, which could be social media, gaming, or really anything that hosts any kind of file. It allows them to identify those images so that the people who are charged with actually finding and looking at them when they're reported, or in some cases we can look directly for them in some countries, don't have to keep seeing them, because I know you've probably heard about these reviewers who are constantly bombarded by these awful images and videos. And the more we could prevent them having to look at this material, both it allows us to analyze a lot more images, and it allows that person not to have to look over and over again at the same images. So that's something, it's used around the world now. It's been very effective, and it keeps improving. And there are a few different databases that hold these hash images, and there's work going on now to combine them, or to allow organizations that have the hashes to share them with each other, so that we have a larger database.
No, that's fascinating. Thank you, John. And, I think there's always this sense, I know many of my colleagues feel as though there's never an answer to how do you actually have enough moderators and reviewers of some of this harmful content. And yet in this area of really dangerous child pornography, it seems to be working, so to speak, right? We don't go through our days experiencing that content because somewhere it's being filtered and screened out. And I just wonder what more we could learn from that. I want to just go to two questions here in the chat. Megan was asking about to what degree, children are involved in looking at how to, sorry, let me find it. How are they included in decision making about these issues that affect them? And, another question about cyber attacks that particularly target child data. Can you offer some thoughts there?
Yeah. Well, we do a lot of facilitating groups of children, or bringing groups of children together in different countries in order to get them to kind of promote their voice and represent it with technology companies, or with other, and could be, for instance, we work with the tea industry in Sri Lanka to get bring together child input so that they can help determine or guide some of the conditions that they face. And so it's not directly against these child sexual abuse materials, because one of the issues we have is that people will find these materials or this information or videos, and they share them because they're outraged that they exist. And that perpetuates the problem because it distributes much wider these images, so people start sharing them with good intent, but it creates a much larger problem. But where I'd say it's working best right now is there's a movement for safety by design. So that's trying to get any company that's creating technology that children might use in order, getting them to think about what issues they might cause. Most companies or programmers or product owners are thinking of all the positive things that this technology that they're creating will do. But there can be a dark side to any technology. So it's important, I think, for us to step in and to call attention to what those negative uses of the technology are. So we've done, for instance, we've worked in Australia and other areas with Instagram to bring together children to give advice or talk about their experiences so that they can make changes that would make those platforms more child-friendly. But it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult to get a large company to change technology, definitely, and even change practices or policies, although it's possible and it happens.
I'm not sure, John, if your question is answered. If you want to specifically ask it, you can go ahead and unmute.
Oh, yes. Hi, thank you for this conversation. It's amazing. My question was about, do you focus on preventing cyber attacks for bad actors that are looking to breach and collect child data?
Yeah, we don't do direct in that area. We've run some campaigns to teach children, for instance, best practices for creating passwords. We've done campaigns around that. So I think coaching or guiding children towards practices that would keep their data safer from attackers, and also, of course, not to create data, not to create images or make posts that would get information out there, or images that they'll regret later. We're finding, for instance, we were in the topic of online child sexual abuse. We understood that abuse was being committed by people who were seeking sexual contact with children, either to get access to images, to engage with them somehow online, or sometimes to meet offline. But more and more we're seeing people or even, communities of people who are coming together to get access to that same material, but just for commercial means, cyber extortion. So, and not just of children, but of anyone. So to entice a child into sharing intimate imagery, for instance, that then can be used to blackmail the child into creating more imagery and sharing a lot of times what's worse and worse content. So it's an issue that we're not directly working in with as far as creating technology, but we're working more on the education of children and other stakeholders. We do a lot of training of frontline child workers or health workers, of educators, ministries of education, and teachers within countries, and anyone who has child contact, their parents also are their caretakers.
Thanks, John. I want to come back to a question that Katya from IREX asked just before she had to leave, which was about reliable safeguards at scale. So, you're talking about the different tools, using creating databases of prohibited images and all of those kinds of things. Are we actually getting to a place where we're achieving that safeguarding at scale? Is that something that's happening with the pace of the expansion every few months of new users all across the world on a variety of platforms?
Yeah, well, we make a difference or draw a difference between what we call digital safeguarding of children and child protection from digital harm, where digital safeguarding is understood for the most part as safeguarding children while they're in our programs or while they have access to technology that we're providing, or just using, for instance, if we were to run in the context of one of our programs, allow children to chat using one of these platforms. So that, and we've done a lot actually in the past several years to adapt our guidelines. We've always had really strong safeguarding guidelines and provide the ability of the children are in our programs, but also anyone to anonymously report any kind of safeguarding issues for something that might happen while a child or someone else is in one of our programs. And that safeguarding extends to they're in a platform or a technology company who's accessing or serving children in some way, has to have safeguarding policies and practices in place themselves. So that's part of some of the advice that we've given and or some of the research we do so that we can give input into whether those safeguards are strong enough and how they can be optimized so that they safeguard children as well as possible.
And I think it's also something that as we seek to embrace all kinds of peace building and dialogue work online and seeking inclusion and expanding engagement, what is our responsibility as well in terms of making sure that we're not also exposing people or at least equipping them to be able to look at those digital harms. The fact that our participants aren't only children, I think still raises questions about that. And I think many of us working in tough environments, closed environments where we know there's surveillance and digital issues for human rights protectors that may cloud our vision from being able to see that actually even people in safer environments are still going to be exposed to a wide range of digital harms. Yeah, excellent. Any last thoughts you want to add? And I want to just thank everybody for coming. Any last thoughts you want to add, John?
Well, I think one point is I talked about that photo DNA or the image hashing. It's something that can be used by any group. It doesn't have to pertain to children. So it may be hard to get platforms to do that for some of the work that peace builders are working on. But for instance, there's a sharing of intimate imagery project that is going on that's not child-based, that allows individuals to load images of themselves that have been shared without their consent, so that platforms can voluntarily take that content down. And that's something that could be used for videos or images related to hate crimes or violence against any kind of vulnerable group.
No, exactly. I mean, I think one of the things we see as we work on tackling fake news is people are constantly showing images of a violent clash from another context and then misusing it. So, I mean, in that instance, you wouldn't be able to take it off the internet completely, I suppose. But I think that's one of the dilemmas that we oftentimes the work seeks to flag that this is not actually, did not happen last week. It's an image from another country 10 years ago that's being used to fuel hatred and tensions. But I think this is a dilemma of how to really make sure that those kinds of images are not, reproduced in the wrong contexts, right? Not sure we could take them off the internet altogether. Well, fantastic. I want to really thank you, John, for your time. I want to remind all of the members that this is an open community of practice, and if you have other people, colleagues, friends that would like to join, please reach out to Nick to sign up. If you have ideas, either from your initiatives or organizations or others that you'd like to bring and do a bit of a demonstration of what you're doing and how it works, this is the place to try and share that. So again, feel free to reach out to Nick. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Thanks again, John.
Okay, thanks for the invitation. So long, all.